So today what we want to do is we want to talk about how to make that quotation sandwich. And this is the handout that was given in class, and I've just altered it so that we can see it more clearly in our video. But I put a sandwich on here because a good quotation, when we use it to become one of our details in writing, it has to have context, it has to have the quotation, and it also has to have an analysis or an interpretation. So the bun and the hamburger itself refer to these different component parts. The context, as I just kind of draw that line here, is that top bun. And this is usually around 2 to 3 sentences where we set up the quotation itself. The meat of the patty or of the hamburger is really our quotation, and that's why it's that thinner part. And so we're going to use one of the two lead-ins, either a direct lead-in or a dialogue tag lead-in. And then lastly, the bottom part of the bun is the analysis or interpretation. So here I have the quotation from yesterday's quotation quiz, and the question I asked in class to really show me that you read was, how did integration take away so much of Melba's social life? And as you can see, this is a quote that comes exactly from the book. So what was I looking for you to do? I was looking for you to use this quote and answer the question by using context, a dialogue tag or direct lead-in, and then an analysis interpretation. So let's do this together and see how would we answer this. Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to come up with context. This is where I set up the quotation and I make my point. If we look at the handout that I have given to you, and it's also on the Google site, this is where I ask myself, where in the story is this quotation coming from? So I'm going to stop for a moment and let me just think. This is the point in the story where Melba's family has received so many threats and phone calls and basically death notices that they are concerned for Melba's safety. Because they're concerned for Melba's safety, they don't want to let her go out and attend any social functions. Now right there's my context, so let's write that up into this box here for the context. So as you take a look here, you can see that I have written my context. Let's read it together. Because Melba's family has received many threats that compromise Melba's safety, her family doesn't feel safe. To keep Melba safe, her mother and her grandmother will not allow her to leave the house and attend social functions. Notice how this context sets up the quote. It's explaining what's going on and why this particular quote would make sense. Now what I want to do is come up with the next step, which is that dialogue tag direct lead-in. So I don't want to just take that quote and put it in here and say, take away so much of Melba's social life. I need to create a dialogue tag or direct lead-in to explain this part. So what's the purpose of this? This is where we use an introductory phrase that gets followed by a comma. It explains the character's emotions, thoughts, or feelings, and we want to always try to use verbs beyond says. So let's create a dialogue tag here. So look at how I've set up my quotation now, and I've used what we call a direct lead-in. It doesn't have any type of dialogue. Dialogue is when we use a version of the word said. I led into this quote by saying Melba is so unhappy that she can't attend any social events, that she complains that, comma, quote, integration has taken away so much of her social life. Notice where the quotations are. Notice how I have a comma that leads into the quote. Notice because the quotation is coming at the end of my sentence, the period comes after the page number. Now, one of the reasons why I have the word her in the bracket is because in the book it said my, but because I'm talking about Melba in third person here, I can't use the word my in here, so because I changed it to her to make sure my sentence sounds correct, I put it in brackets to show that. So let's look at what we've got so far. I've got context. Because Melba's family has received many threats that compromise Melba's safety, her family doesn't feel safe. To keep Melba safe, her mother and grandmother will not allow her to leave the house and attend social functions. Now I have my direct lead-in in the quote. Melba is so unhappy that she can't attend any social events that she complains that, comma, quote, integration has taken away so much of her social life, end quote, page 60, period. Notice how it's smooth and it flows together. Now I need to do the last part, and I need to analyze the quote. This is why I ask myself, what makes this quote so important? In other words, so what she can't go to her social life or she can't go and attend any social events? What's the big deal? This is where I need to tell the reader, here's why it's such a big deal to miss out on social events. So these two sentences I'm going to create down here are going to show how. So now we can take a look at the two sentences I created and notice how they answer the so what. When Melba envisioned becoming one of the 9 students to integrate, she didn't realize the impact it would have on her personal life. Everyone needs social activities to relieve stress, and people also need friends to survive their daily trials and adversities. Without socialization, Melba will feel isolated. So altogether, notice how it's a quotation sandwich, and look at how it offers such a rich detail versus just placing a quotation into our writing. This is what we want to create. The whole item together, all 3 components, make for a rich discussion. So lastly, this is the quotation sandwich that you have on your handout. This was the example. And follow along with me as I just underline and show you how my first 2 sentences begin with context. Melba often encounters acts of racism, which slowly take away any feeling of power she has for being one of the first African Americans to integrate into an all-white school. This is context. Look at the next sentence. After trying to attend Central High School on the first day, Melba's nearly attacked on the streets. Again, context. Now I'm going to lead into the quote. Melba was so scared as the. Notice how it's not a dialogue word, so this is direct lead-in. The pursuers were so close I could look back and see anger in their eyes. This is my lead-in and my quotation. And then lastly, this part down here is going to be my analysis. Because the mob outside of Central High was so determined to stop the integration, they took power into their own hands and chased Melba and her mother away from the school. So remember that for a quotation sandwich, when we analyze quotes, we always have context. We always lead into our quotation and provide the quote and properly cite it. And we always have an analysis and interpretation.